Welcome back, everybody. This is Laura Danger and Crystal Britt, and this is the Time to Lean podcast. We are here to air your dirty laundry and maybe clean up your shit. How are you, Crystal?
I am okay. I'm hitting that end of summer wall where I'm just like, what day is it? What time is it? Where am I? But we're okay. We're here.
Yeah, we're doing back to school shopping this weekend, and I hate it. I Time is flying.
Yeah. Yep. I hate
Yeah.
every bit of it. Don't like having to feel prepared. Already feeling behind the eight ball, and the school has not started yet. So it's always a
School
fun way to.
lunches, all that. Mm-mm. No
Yep.
thanks.
Nope. We're good.
Nope.
Um, yeah, I am super excited. I know everybody who's listening to this is just like, yeah, same page.
Yes.
I'm super stoked to get into the video that you had today because I know that there was a lot of big feels around it,
Yes.
myself included.
Okay, so let me give you a little bit of
It's
background.
it's the sigh for me. It's the sigh for me.
Rubbing my face. Okay, it's so interesting. I had a video in my drafts responding to this one, and it's been sitting there. And just very coincidentally, this video went super viral recently. The video that I'm about to show you is from early 2022. It was posted by somebody I didn't follow. It's somebody who has a lot of followers and people really like her. So as always, none of what we talk about is judging individuals. We are very often critiquing words, talking about language, what we see, how it's framed, context, big picture. So
Systems, yep.
right out of the gates, we are not, if we talk about what happens in this video, we are not talking about an individual, don't know this person. Only context we have is what we are given. So, that said, when this video first came out, I responded to it and I had big feelings and I was pretty critical of what was in the video. There is a noted lack of nuance online, and my video was not received very well to the point
Okay.
where I took it down.
Okay.
So, another video by another very beloved big creator came out on the same topic recently. And so that's where I was like, "Ooh, I got to revisit that because now, it's been a year. I think this is worth talking about." Still, there is too much nuance to capture in a 3-minute video. So, we're going to talk about it here.
Totally. Love that.
Okay. Um, Let me share. Okay, there it is.
Perfect.
All right. If you are not watching, if you are just listening, it's a woman close up. She is responding to something. No, she's not. Okay, I'm going to start that over again because it's going to flip between videos.
Totally.
Okay, if you're not watching this on your phone and you're just listening, it's a video of a woman close up. She's the only thing in frame.
My marriage completely changed when I realized that so many of my problems, me being upset, were not my husband's problems. And that so many of his problems, him being upset, were not my problems. I was at my therapist's office and I said, "Therapist, my husband doesn't do the dishes. We have been married years and he doesn't do the dishes and it drives me crazy." And she said, "Okay, well, does he make you do the dishes?" And I said, "Well, he's not doing them, so it means that I'm doing them. He actually would just prefer to use paper plates." And she said, "Well, why don't you use paper plates?" And I said, "Because I don't want to. That's stupid and da 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 da. I want to use real plates." And she said, "So why does he have to do the dishes?" And I said, "What? Well, the dishes need to be done." And she said, "Yeah, but he doesn't want to do them and he'd just rather use paper plates. So why are you expecting him to do them when you're the one that wants to use like real plates?" And I said, This is not how I thought this conversation was going to go. She said, Sharon, let's hypothetically say that you have begged your husband to do the dishes for years, that you go to therapy over it, that you do all of these things to get him to do the dishes, and he still doesn't do them. What are your options here? Are you going to divorce him? Are you going to be pissed off about it forever? Or are you going to be a big girl and figure out how to be happy in your marriage and how to do the damn dishes the way that you want to do them? I said, well, I'm not going to divorce him over his dishes. Everything else is great. And she said, just be a big girl and figure out then. He's not responsible for making you happy. You're a full-grown adult. That's your job. Like I said, not the way that I thought that conversation was going to go. And then he was getting annoyed at how I do the laundry. And I was so bothered that he was annoyed. And then I realized, oh, him being annoyed is his problem. And if he has an issue with how I do the laundry, then he can do the laundry. And then finally one day he said, hey, what if I just did all the laundry? And I was like, yeah, and I'll just do all the dishes. And he was like, yeah. And we've been doing that for 4 years now. And like, life-changing. And applying that mentality to different aspects of our marriage, that you are responsible for you and I am responsible for me. And that is good and healthy and okay. Oh my gosh, it has changed everything. Now, before you make a rude comment, sit and think about this. Maybe it doesn't apply to you, and that's okay. And it doesn't apply to every situation. Nuance. But do think about it. My marriage.
Okay, what sticks out to you, Crystal?
Well, there are a couple of things. The first is how I would have just completely not made it through the whole video if I had come across that organically. It took like concerted effort for me to sit through that. So, okay, first of all, like as a therapist, I understand what this therapist is trying to do, right? Like, odds are this is not the first time she has come into this session to complain about the dishes, right? This, for me to have that kind of a response, to be like, listen, you've got 3 options. You've come in here, you've talked about this a lot. It would have to be like a repeated thing where my client was not taking any action. We call it, in motivational interviewing, we call it, they would have a lot of ambivalence, right? They would have to have, in order to necessitate the urgency to make a change, you can't be ambivalent. You've got to have a willingness to, we call it a rate of change. There's a scale. Like, it's like, where is your client on this, like, willingness to change the situation that they're in? I'm imagining she was sitting in ambivalence for a while before this clinician said, like, you've got 3 options. What I do have an issue with is the idea of minimizing, to me, that, like, let me gather my thoughts so that we don't have to cut this into like 800 pieces. She eventually got to a place, which is essentially what we do for fair play, right? Eventually she got to a place where it was like, he does the laundry, she does the dishes. What I don't love is how they got there. And I feel like for most of us, the process of how we get there is what constitutes and facilitates connection to each other, right? If the 2 of us can come together and agree we're building a life together, we love each other, we want to solve this issue so that we both feel closer to each other and we can repair the relationship, like rifts that have occurred over dishes and laundry. What is our minimum standard for each other? What is the household? Like, are there deep-seated, personal issues that are coming up because of these 2 things, right? What is this communicating to me that you don't want to use dishes and that you want to use paper plates? I have things with paper, right? Like, there's just not digging. It's just like, I'm irritated with you. And then to have a professional be like, well, that's your individual problem. Like, why is that his problem? Seems very reductive. That's what it feels like to me. It seems like a very reductive way of, we're going to deal with this without actually dealing with the root issues. I'm glad that that's worked for them for 4 years. I would be really curious to see if in 10 years that's still sustainable.
I think, wow, great job. That is a really interesting way to look at it, because, right, the problem is very relatable up front. We have a different idea of what doing the dishes is, and we keep butting heads on it. We hear that all the time. I've been there, absolutely. And then the ending is you take responsibility fully of the dishes. I fully do the laundry. Great. That's how we do it in my house too. In fact, we just did a trade in the last week. I'm really excited about it. So that's awesome. And 100%. That middle part is what got me. And that's what I responded to. And people were mad at me because, and totally valid. I focused on the paper plate issue. Mm-hmm. And you said it so much better. The issue was not being curious, not being willing to engage in a conversation, not even, they didn't talk about it at all.
Right. Right.
It sounded like, and maybe this isn't what happened because, you know, you only hear her perspective, but it sounded like she heard, get over it, find a way to adapt. What are you going to do? You're going to divorce over the dishes? Like, okay, well, that's totally dismissing the point of what's happening here, which is I have been communicating to my husband for years that I want him to participate in this with me. And he has denied me over and over and over and over again to the point where I have dragged him now to couples therapy and he still won't hear me and he is still not hearing me. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to find a way to be okay with my spouse not giving a fuck.
Yes. And that's the thing. And to have the therapist mirror back to you, yeah, that is what you need to do. You need to take responsibility for your own feelings. And I'm, of course, paraphrasing a lot of assumption, like maybe that's not what the clinician said. But there are a lot of couples therapists who will say, right, well, that sounds like a you thing. And it's like, okay, but we're building a life together. So even if it's something that I am, and again, this is in a situation, I always put all the caveats on it because people will say like, well, what about narcissists in therapy and all of these things? It's like, no, this is assuming there are like no personality disorders involved, that no one is in a psychotic episode, that no one is, right? Like in a situation where everybody's pretty well regulated, these are our issues together. If it comes up in me, we need to talk about it. In therapy, individual therapy for me, one of the things that got like my husband to be me and my therapist to be like, okay, my husband has benefited enough from secondary, therapy, secondary benefits from therapy. It was that I kept coming to this same thing of what this communicates to me is that I'm not important. I'm not tearing up. I have a cold. I'm not important, right? Like you don't see me. You don't understand what my actual struggle is, and you're trying to deal with it to get me out of the way, so to calm me down as fast as possible, which he's conflict avoidant. So that was what he was trying to do. But I internalized that as abandonment, right? Yeah. And our dynamic is that once I have some sort of perceived abandonment, I go, cool, fuck you. I'm going to be on my island. I can do it myself. I've done it before. I don't need anybody. I get the most prickly I ever am in those circumstances. So even though the surface level issue is paper plates, for me, that's what it would be communicating. And that's why it's important. That's why it's worth discussing with your partner. That's why it's not just a me issue and I need to figure out, like I do work on those issues, but my partner needs to be aware that that's what he's communicating to me. That's not an isolated problem I need to figure out on my own. That's not fair.
Yeah, that makes me think of the time, like when there was like a month and a half in 2021 where I hit total rock bottom with like mental health issues. And, I ended up leaving my job. I got a diagnosis, got medicated for bipolar 2. It was pure chaos. And my husband was working 12-hour days and I was working full time, picking up the kids in person after the pandemic had started for the first time. I was a shell of a person and I was for the first time ever, I was feeding my kids fast food every single day. And it was just like a Pop-Tart in the morning and a Happy Meal at night, like over and over and over. Now my feelings on that have totally changed since then. But at the time, I had a lot of shame about that.
Yeah.
And it was weighing on me very heavily that I couldn't do this because in the back of my head, I heard my husband saying like, we should be feeding them this or this or this. And it was we had never talked about that, never said those things out loud to each other, never set a standard. But I heard this voice of like, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right, over and over. This could have turned into a battle where he had that actually been true, which, like, spoiler alert, he didn't actually feel that way. And it was not a problem when I ended up talking about my feelings about it. He and I could have gotten into this paper plate battle where I could have been like, well, if you don't like it, you freaking feed them. Like, you quit your job and come home and do it. Like, I'm fine with this.
Right.
But what ended up happening was we sat down. I said, here's how I'm feeling about this. He said, this is the amount of resources and mental energy we have. This is where our capacity is right now. You're doing a great job. The kids are fed. They are happy. You are giving yourself enough room to relax when you need it, taking a break. Like, we talked about why the standard exists, which was social pressure. We talked about what was going on inside of my brain, why I kept playing this shame cycle over and over again. He talked about what's most important to him, which is the kids are fed and safe. And we got, like, our standard has shifted now that our life has shifted, but we were curious. We talked about it. He joined me in that conversation on the weekends. Hey, let's make sure we supplement the week time stuff with, like, low sodium things, fresh fruits. Like, we were, it was not like, get the fuck over it. Your feelings are your feelings.
And that's the thing of, like, or I mean, and we have heard this before. He could have said, I'm working 12-hour days. This is just like, I don't know, like, I don't have energy to do it. Like, both of you could have gotten very defensive. Both of you could have said, like, well, I don't know, it sounds like a you problem. Like, it's just very, so here's for me is the core of it. It's not a partnership if you're not having those conversations, or you don't have the opportunity to have those conversations, right? Like, then we are, and don't get me wrong, then we're just roommates. And don't get me wrong, there are seasons of my life where my husband and I have been roommates, right? When things are really, really strenuous, when they're really, really hard. I would have preferred during those times, like right after we had a baby, right, that we would have had something like fair play in place in order to feel more connected to each other, so that we didn't have all of the shame and social pressures and things behind us to make us feel like roommates and tagging in and out. But that's essentially what's happening. Then you're dealing with a shitty roommate who won't do the dishes when they leave the dishes in the sink, right? Or they're like, well, those aren't. Then it becomes, you know what it becomes? You know what it reminds me of? Is it becomes my two oldest kids. It becomes my son counting the number of dishes like he does and dividing them in half, and then doing half the dishes, but mostly those dishes, if he goes first, are silverware. Do you know what I mean? Like, then it becomes a thing of, like, I'm not doing 1 ounce, which developmentally appropriate. My kids are 8 and 10. Like, that's normal, right? For siblings who are in elementary school, that's normal. But for grown adults to be like, I'm going to drag you to the sink, I'm going to make you, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, fuck you. Like, I'm going to do silverware. It's like this, that's not a good dynamic for a long-term partnership.
And yes. And I think why this connected with me and my situation with the Happy Meals was that if the man in this situation, if her husband in this situation was saying, I would prefer to use paper plates, that would be like me saying, I need to do fast food every day because here's where I'm at mentally. I am at truly the edge, and I need to make sure that everybody's basic needs are met. We have to survive. Here's how we're going to do it. And you know what's even so sweet is after that conversation, my husband and I ended up identifying like 4 fast food places plus a delivery place that was within our budget that was really great. Like, it had hummus that the kids really enjoyed. He helped me sit down and problem solve the issues I was having with what was going on. We bought pre-cut vegetables and put them in baggies in the fridge and was like, toss this in the car when you get the kids from school, and then they can eat peppers in the car, like the vitamins in that. If what was going on with this couple was he was at his edge and could not find the capacity within himself to wash dishes, that is completely different than being resistant to a conversation, being resistant to joining. It's right. You say that all the time, like the bid for connection. Like, I want to join you in this.
Yep.
Even if your kids were like, you know, I have a big project coming up. I'm feeling really nervous about the first day of school.
Yep.
Got you, buddy.
100%. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, and to that end, right, you're exactly right. Context is so important, but it takes that curiosity and that leaning in of like, I care about you, and so I want to know why this is important to you. It's the thing of like, like when something is so tense, having your partner ask you a question like, what's going on? Like, this seems like you seem to have like a really, I mean, however you want to say it, but like, this seems like a lot. What's going on? Are you okay? And not in a condescending way, because I can fully say that in a way that is fully condescending very easily. The way it lets the tension out of the room of like, oh, you're not trying to fight with me. You're trying to understand. You're trying to connect with me. You're getting into this with me, right? Like you said, Jack, as opposed to, you know, getting defensive, stepped into it with you and said, you know what? Here are a couple of really easy ways that I can think of off the top of my tired, exhausted, burnt out brain. But I'm getting in this boat with you. I'm not going to stand out from the side and go, well, yeah, that looks hard. You know, like I'm going to get into it with you and be like, yeah, here's, because I like, even as you're talking about the fast food example, I'm thinking, because I do the same thing, right, in seasons of life where the social pressure, like that is something that me and my husband should probably do, because we have disagreements over, for him, mostly sugar, because he doesn't have ADHD, which there's a lot of connections between people who are ADHD and not just dopamine seeking, because that's like a buzzword, but connections between diet and ADHD and the kind of foods we seek out. But the alternative is that the kids don't eat. Like I have been in that position before, right? Like I have been in that position before where I'm like, I need for them to have more than and it's hard to describe to someone who has not been at a mental health bottom. I don't have the actual energy to put dino nuggies in a microwave. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard to explain to somebody who doesn't know what it's felt like. But it's like, no, I have the energy to drive through and have a packaged Happy Meal handed to my child with milk, with apple slices, and with a cheeseburger in it. That's it. Mm-hmm. Then I can check it off my list and feel like the alternative was not eating.
Right. And that takes so much empathy. And I think that the biggest shift in my relationship over the last several years, like, you can't change other people. Can't. What I had to do was get out of my own way. And I pushed myself to the edge. I'm not blaming myself here at all. I'm taking personal responsibility for how I behaved with the knowledge I had.
Yeah.
But I was so afraid of being a bad mom. I was afraid of doing, all you hear online is how you are setting your kids up. Oh, they're going to have a bad relationship with food. They're going to blah, 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 blah. Like, also was in a full-blown mental health crisis, fully.
Yep.
And was to the point where I was scared to say it out loud.
Yep.
I was afraid that I was like, okay, I feel very worried that I am going to snap at my children.
Yep.
Yell at them, which is absolutely not what I want to do. Or, so I can go home and I can put the dino nuggies in the oven and I can take the 30 minutes it takes to cut and chop and I can serve them that and resent them and be mad. Or I can get myself a freaking McFlurry for dinner.
Or I can feed my kids and get a girl dinner. Yes. That's what I can do. A girl dinner with a good amount of calories that's going to sustain me for the rest of the afternoon. That's
Right.
what I can do. Yeah.
And it's
100%.
and like clearly maybe to someone else it's not ideal. Maybe it's not
I don't know.
Instagrammable.
They're not listening to this podcast. I like the other thing too, right? I feel like it's very relatable to parents who find themselves in a similar situation. I think this is very unique post-COVID, post-lockdown, especially, where we had, I replied to them, but Real Growing Pains posted in her stories yesterday, like, do any other parents get PTSD when all of a sudden they don't have childcare? And I replied and was like, absolutely. Also, when my
Fully.
kid's school pops up on my phone, my heart jumps into my throat. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, are they, like, my brain goes, are they sick? I'm going to have to keep them home. They're not going to be able to go back until they have a negative COVID test. Like, immediately jumps to that. So, like, I feel like, especially in this post-COVID, not post-COVID, but post-quarantine lockdown stage, this is a very relatable, parents are scraping from the bottom of a barrel, right? Scraping
Yeah,
from the
there has
absolute bottom
been-
of a barrel.
There was no recovery time.
No.
There was no grace given to parents.
Oh, I aged 10 years. There's not been a recovery time.
No, this specific group this is going to be our recession, depression.
Yeah.
Like it is at our core affected how we parent and how we exist in the world forever.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So I think having a partner, and to be fair, in cis het relationships where maybe mom was primary caregiver or was the one who had to step up and, not, that sounded so condescending, not had to step up, were forced to work from home and also Zoom school and take care of kids at home. And there was no question about that transition. There are just as many dads who have not even sat with the impact that it had on their relationship, that it had on them personally, right? Like, there's so much that's backed up. Trying to figure out what that in-between space is going to look like is going to feel very awkward. It may feel forced, right? Mm-hmm. Like I had, when Ben and I were learning how to communicate with each other, when we first started going to couples therapy, that was the first time we hadn't had a therapist go, well, that's really weird that you guys fight over text. Like, when we have our biggest fights, we fight over text, even if we're in the same room, right? Or like the kids are up or whatever, or like, one of us is upstairs, one of us is downstairs, because both of our brains need that stopgap to be able to reread what the person's saying, think about what we're going to say, and then be able to craft it in a way that's not going to hurt or be off the cuff or be, impulsive. And it can feel awkward to try and figure out what that middle ground is. It can be awkward to say, can we sit down and talk about what the dishes look like for you and I? Because I know we both have two very different ways that we want to approach it. But I love you, and I don't want to spend our time after the kids get home from school and after we get home from work fighting about the dishes, right? Like, finding that minimum standard of care together, having that curiosity together about each other, right, is how we repair that.
Yeah, I like text too. What's really interesting is I saw my daughter. My oldest is so much like me. She's like, it's so interesting watching her process the same way I do. Okay. So yeah, this morning she was upset about something. My husband made a car, like a paper cutout of a car, and made one for the older one. And then the younger one wanted a truck. So he started to make a truck. And then the older one was like, oh, she gets a truck, and wanted the truck. And so we had like 3 minutes to go until we had to be at school. And it was like, okay, so now I'm going to make you one. And she immediately got upset, shut down. She didn't get the thing she wanted and didn't think she would get the thing she wanted, and she was upset. She was upset by the whole thing. And she left the room and was mad and didn't want to talk to either one of us. And the little one turned to her father and said, big sister can have the truck. She's upset. She can have the truck. And Big sister was already in the other room, very mad, like digging into why she was mad, trying to sort through it. You could tell because she like couldn't put her finger on it at first. She
Yep.
was doing what I do, which is like, why am I upset? I don't know. And by the time she came back in, she like came back into the other room. She was fully mad at that point.
Fully ready to fight. Mm-hmm.
And by the time she got back in, she was mad and the problem had been solved.
Yep.
So she had to reconcile the two feelings, re-regulate down, and bring the new information in that she had just justified her own feelings about. It was a mess. And I saw it. None of this happened out loud.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, you watch it happen because you have embodied it. I'm very curious, what feeling do you think she was experiencing when she walked into the room? Because I can feel it in my body, what I would be feeling at that moment, noticing that it was solved.
Oh, I mean, if I'm going to play out the words that I'd tell myself, I shouldn't have been upset in the first place, like doubting my own feelings, feeling like I overreacted.
Shame. Immediately shame.
Yes.
Yep. I would immediately be embarrassed and ashamed that I was upset in the first place.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to create space for her to validate. We did some external validation for her. And then we talked about, it took a good 30 seconds for her to calm down, and she gave her little sister a hug and said, thank you. But it's really hard to communicate with one another. And when I'm in text, I can elevate so quick, and I get to do it alone, quietly behind the screen. And I get to re-regulate, and it gets rid of that shame. Like, I don't have to feel that shame.
Yes. Yep. It gives that buffer to not do it. It's so hard to explain because it is like that thing of like, you can feel it, but it's hard to put words to. When you don't have to have, because it's vulnerable to have other people see it. And then to have to, you guys weren't like, I can imagine some families would have been like, see, big sister, like, why were you upset? Little sister solved it for you. Like, see, right? Like, and that's where that shame can really be exploited out loud, right? Like, in the same way, if you have a partner who, when you come to them and they're like, well, see, I'm just, whatever. Like, see, I did the dishes. Aren't you embarrassed? Like, I don't, you know what I mean? If they don't create that vulnerable space for you, or texting, if you have that past experience in your lived experience, being able to have that buffer as an adult, really, that helps me as well. Where it's like, okay, I don't have to live this out in real time. I can if I want to, if I feel like I have enough emotional, capacity lined up to be that vulnerable. But sometimes I just want to be embarrassed by myself for 30 seconds as opposed to being embarrassed in front of you for 10 minutes. And then working myself into a thing of like, sorry, I don't even know why we're fighting. And it's like, no, this is valid. You're allowed to be upset, right? I love that you guys provided external validation to her about being upset.
Yeah, that's the added benefit of having a very similar experience and being, I've always been very hot-tempered, and I'm very impulsive, and that's one of the benefits of being with somebody who's known me for a very long time, can be the person to take a beat and realize I'm going to come back down while I see my own therapist. I'm working on it. I'm medicated. It's all good, but also it's really nice that I have a partner who does not invalidate. Though if we're both locked in a defensive cycle, that is also why text is good, because I am real good at but no, here's a million reasons why I was right.
For sure. No, fully relatable. Yeah, definitely. On the flip side of that, having a partner who will fully, when we were first married, would fully roll over at the immediate sign of any sort of conflict, I was like, I need you to fight with me, or I don't know what we're supposed to be doing. Now I feel like shit. I feel please don't tell me you understand and immediately move on from it. But yeah, having that, I feel like too, I don't know. I mean, we could talk about this forever, but is part of like having a neurodivergent brain. Like, I don't know, hot-tempered, I don't know, or quick-tempered, because I see the same thing in my kids, but I don't even, like, they get angry, but it's the thing of like in their neurodivergent brains, they process information so quickly that they can boop, 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 sort it. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, I checked all of these things on my list. That's bad. And now I'm mad about it. You know what I mean? I don't even know if it's like the, quick temperedness. I don't know if I would characterize it as quick tempered so much as like they're very fast processors and they need to have it in a category really quickly. And sometimes that category needs a little bit more time to be like, is it in that category or does it just like feel like it needs to be in that category so that you can move on and not be upset, not feel the feeling. So there's a lot of, I feel like, again, nuance, leaning into curiosity about like what is going on with your partner and asking those questions, or at least asking, this seems like a really big reaction to this. And I know we've been fighting about it for a while. What is like, tell me more. I want to know more about what's going on with you.
Right. Yeah, to bring it back to what this woman in the video said. It's really interesting that at the end of the video, she says, like, of course this isn't going to work for everyone, and remember nuance. And I was like, yes, and.
Yes, and. I did think
yes.
It was really interesting that she mentioned nuance right off the bat.
Yes, and.
At the very end.
Put on your big girl panties. Ugh, that made me feel really gross. Okay, so the conclusion is, talk about it. And text is not wrong.
No, if you have to text about it, great. You have two people that you can refer to who have a podcast, who have nationwide platforms that they throw shit up onto that also do that. Say you heard it from a therapist, because you did. It's do what works for you and stay curious about what's going on with your partner. Mm-hmm. Open communication as opposed to, well, I don't know, I guess you just need to deal with it.
Right. I love that. Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. As always, send us questions to all of the places in our links, and you can find us at Time to Lean Pod on Instagram. And we'll talk to you next time. Like and subscribe.
We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.